we want to know how big a buttonhole this button will take. So this probably is the simplest because it's flat. And we could probably get the width of it. And what happened to my, well, here it is. And we can make a line like this. And then cut that and see if I can pass the button through it. Okay, that's the most common of the way of finding out how big it is. Because you can get a piece of cloth and keep cutting until it fits. But paper, you cut it and it passes through easily, well, not loosely. So here it goes. And if it's too small, the paper will rip, and then you know that you got to make your buttonhole that big, things like that. Okay. The same with these ball buttons too. You cannot really, you don't have a width, so you've got to do some guessing. So say this big fat one here. Okay, if I can pass this through easily, if you hear a tear, that means it needs to be a little bit bigger. See, it tore a little bit. Okay, so that means it's got to be a little bit bigger. Okay, so that's how you would figure out for this one. Force it through a piece of cut paper, and then you know how big you need to have it. Okay, so now we got the buttonhole figured out. Okay, all right. Now we have our skirt. If you plan to do it in your skirt or your sample, the rule is that when the button is button, okay, when the button is button, you got to listen to all of this because it's not really that simple. When the button is button, like that, okay, see, what it is the space between the flush edge and the button is 1/4 or half the diameter of the button. Okay, so that means this button is 1/4. And if this is a 1-inch button, or, so half of the diameter is 1/2 inch or 1/2 inch. So anything in between that is fine for a spacing. You don't want your button to be against, when it's buttoned, to be right next to the flush line or over it. Okay, I see these in the store windows, I have to tell you that. And it's kind of embarrassing. I said, oh, it's not my students doing it. Okay, but the rule is 1/4 or half the diameter of the button. If you find you got a little button like 3/8 of an inch, it's still, and then half of the diameter is going to be smaller than 1/4. 1/4 is the answer. Okay, so but that's how, if you can stay within that when it's buttoned. So therefore, I have one on my sample here. See, the button is in its buttonhole, and it's stressing because my waist is fat. Still, there's 1/4. Okay, you got to think that way. It is not that the buttonhole is 1/4 from the edge. Okay, it is not. It's when it's buttoned. The button is going to be 1/4 to half the diameter of the. Okay, so that's it. I don't know why, but students every year think that, okay, 1/4, the buttonhole goes 1/4 from the edge. No, it doesn't come. Yeah, you don't just. You have to figure out how that 1/4 is going to be created. Okay, alrighty. I'm going to be really strict because it's like the 7 and 9 inch rule on the zipper, things like that. It's one of those things that, you know, you either right or you right wrong. Okay? Okay, so the space between here and here. This is how we're going to determine where we're going to place the buttonhole. What happens now is we're going to be sewing this button on, and so there's 2 holes, could be 4, okay, and threads are coming out of the holes, but they meet in a shank together on behind of the button. Okay, so the button is here, and the thread goes through the holes, and then they meet right in the middle of those holes as a shank, because we're going to be creating a thread shank with this flat button. The other buttons that have its own shank is in the middle of the button. Okay, so what we're going to do now is the shank is going to be in the middle of these 2 holes. Okay. All right. Now that's where the shank is going to come out of the buttonhole. So what we're going to do is, in front of the shank, we're going to start the buttonhole. And it's normally like 1/8 of an inch. So there's a, you have your buttonhole that has called bar tack, and then the lip, and then the bar tack, and then the lip, okay? And the shank comes out there. So that's where I put the shank there. And in front of the shank is where I'm going to start the buttonhole. I already know the size of my buttonhole, so all I have to do is where I'm going to start the button in front of the shank, lay that there, and mark the length of my button. So that's how you figure out your buttonhole, the placement of the buttonhole. Okay. And then when you figure that out, by placing the buttonhole down with 1/4 to half the diameter of the button, something like that, then figure out where you're going to be placing it. Then find out where the shank is going to be. In front of the shank is where the bar tack of the buttonhole is going to be. And then you start the size of the buttonhole across. And then by cutting the paper, you know what size it is. That's the simplest I can give you on button and buttonholes. Okay, yeah. Okay, so what I'm looking for is that you do have that 1/4. Okay, yeah. Any questions? We're gonna do it now. Okay. Okay. So, since this is a sample, I can mark it all up. Okay, so this is how we're gonna be doing it. Okay, say I want 1/4. Okay, make it 1/4. Center the buttonhole on the band. Don't push it, don't just place it. You need to get it centered. Okay. And what I like to do is I mark the 2 holes of the, and that show through, yeah, okay. Mark the 2 holes of the button, because in the middle of that is where the shank is going to come out all. Okay, so let's see if we can get another color. This blue is really, okay. Right in the middle is where the shank, yeah, that doesn't come out. Let me see if that red shank is going to come out. Okay. Right there. Okay. Between the 2 holes of the button. So I placed my button exactly where I want it to be when it's buttoned. Okay. So that's where the shank is coming out. Okay. So in front of the shank, we're going to start our button hole. So put a line there. Okay. And then this is the size I want my button hole to be. Lay that on and mark the other side. Okay, so that's how big the buttonhole has to be. And I'm even going to draw a line so that I can kind of follow that. Okay, do this in chalk in a real garment. Okay, so now that's where the buttonhole is going to be. It's on the top lap or the flush lap. The button is placed on the underlap. Okay. Alright, now I'm going to do buttonholes. Alright. What we do is change to, so I didn't even look if I have buttonhole foot. Let me see. I have a roll hand foot here. Buttonhole foot, no. I might have to steal it off the machine.